Well, it's another snow day, you know. Still fighting the cold. And one of the things I've learned is one of the hardest things to do is to actually get the project started at times. And today's no exception. Just been out fighting snow because we've had a lot of snow recently. So what I wanted to do is start organizing parts to where I can eventually put together the first of the 390s. Kind of made a list of things that I need to build a saw and kind of rummaged through the junk pile to get there. Pretty much got what I need, I think. Now this is a junk pile saw. This is not new parts. Like that cylinder there was a little scuffed up, so I put a hone, and it's got a scratch or two, but you know, it's really not that bad. It'll run. So that's going to get used. It's going to get new bearings, obviously a new gasket. It's going to get a new piston because I couldn't find a good piston. And I've got a bunch of these rings, and what I did is I went through and measured the end gap, and if the end gap was reasonable, I kept them. If not, I threw them away. So it's going to get these rings, which will file back into seal once they get into these cross hatches here. That'll pretty much file them into shape. So it's getting a new piston, but not new rings. It's going to get a new flywheel side seal. So that's what it's going to get new. Everything else is from the pile. Oh, it's getting a new fuel line. Oh, and it's getting a different boot because the boot that was on it was no good. But I pulled the carburetor apart, and while it's used, it doesn't look bad. Get the water out of it. There's really nothing wrong with that diaphragm. And I'm assuming that it'll be the same on the other side. I don't see the sense in replacing that stuff if it's good. And again, the whole concept, this is a junk pile saw. Not meant to be perfect. It's just meant to run. The whole premise being that I want to see if I can take a bunch of these junk parts and turn it into a running saw. You know, it'll be a reasonably good saw. I mean, I don't know if I'd take it out and try to make a living with it, but I suspect that in the configuration we're going to have when it's done, it'll cut a lot of firewood. It's got the later carburetor. That's good. You know, it's got some good stuff. The cases are going to be the one that has Bondo on the front. Maybe I'll put some on the inside too. So I think I'm going to put together the carburetor, intake boot, cylinder, maybe the muffler, and then change out the bearings. Get some epoxy on the inside of that case, so I'm pretty sure it's doubly sealed both inside and out. Well, while I've got the cases warming up, I kind of went back and forth, you know, do I use those cases or not? And you know, with epoxy in there, they should be fine. So I'm going to go ahead with that plan. But just to review some things that you got to kind of plan for. There's a lot of parts, you know. You got those cases. So along with the cases, you're going to have the 6 screws and the guide pins. Obviously a cylinder, piston rings, muffler gasket, heat shield, right? You got to have carburetor, clamp, filter holder with the screws, 2 screws, and an intake boot. And one thing you can never forget is that little metal ring. I've done that, believe it or not. And then wonder why the saw always runs a little bit lean. You got to have that tray. Top cover. Now, the top cover has these little bushings. So, you know, not just screws, you have to have the top cover, this clips like that, but also the screws and those bushings. Filter cover, filter, choke lever. Alright, we got the baffle here. pull start, you got this little guide right here, this little horn there. Chain brake, but also with a chain brake handle, you got to have this little bushing right there. Okay. And of course, while we're thinking about the flywheel side, you got to have a flywheel and an ignition. This is the ignition I'm going to use. Obviously, crankshaft. One thing I want to point out is that the threads on the 390, 385 series are the same as the 372. So the tools that I have for a 372 work just fine. You know that? And again, this saw build is going to have this cylinder, which is not perfect. Okay, it's got a couple scratches, but I think it'll run. Flywheel side seal, new piston. I'm going to pick the best of the rings based on the in gap that I've got. I've got a bunch of the 54mm stuff. You know, and then you have things like the oil pump and the oil pump gear, worm gear. Just a lot of stuff that you got to sort of line up. So what I've been doing today is I went through and found a side cover, you know, a tank. I'm going to change the fuel line. Again, all the screws, 6 for the cases. There's a screw in the cylinder, so I needed 3 more. Muffler screws. These are those pins that kind of limit the travel between the saw chassis and the handle. Of course, the handle screws, flywheel nut, washer, and of course for the sprocket, I've got a decent sprocket around here somewhere, right? Along with that washer and the clip, and here's the clutch. So you got to sort of go through and make sure you've got all these parts before you start one of these projects. By the way, if you notice in that carburetor, it's got those little red plastic spacer type things that you see on 372s. And I've said this before, but a 390 is just kind of like a 372, just a little bit bigger. I got to find a decent wrist pin. I got some wrist pins around that I'll clean up, polish up, probably get a different bearing. These are new OEM bearings. And notice that on the 385, OEM means nylon. I hate those, but that's what they have. But they're also integral sealed. So they may be like the same diameter as a 6203. That's what that is. But they're a little wider because they also encompass that seal. I thought I had a slam dunk with my 372 Polar because it threaded right onto the clutch threads, you know. I'm going, wow, I got this thing made. Right? 372 has a different diameter here, so what I ended up doing is decide to make my own little bushing. So I turned this up in the lathe because I want to see if I can pull it through, pushing on the inside race of the bearing but not push on the pump. You know what I'm saying? Just go like that. So this is an experiment. I want to see if I can make it work. See if I can get a washer in there. Let's just see if it works. What do you think, guys? So when you start playing the game with these pullers, the material has to have enough hardness, you know? Otherwise it won't take but a couple of times and those threads are wasted, you know? Just can't do it with any material. So this one says M14 1.25. What do you think, guys? Farmer Jones. I'm going to use probably the same arrangement on the other side because it has that same larger diameter that I need. You know, this to clear that. Put this in my coat so it won't be so cold. You know, it's so cold today. But this is not. This is, well, probably close to body temperature, wouldn't you think? I struggle with that. I go, yeah, you know, why should I use it? And I thought about it. There's nothing wrong with the cases. It's just ugly. And that's kind of the point, is kind of a field repair in showing that a lot of this stuff, it doesn't really have to be perfect to make a good running saw. You know, if you're in a pinch, you can make a lot of this stuff work. And having a new set of bearings, decent rings, you know, even if that cylinder isn't perfect, this thing is going to run fine. Now this is, again, this is an OEM gasket. So this is going to have OEM bearings, OEM seal, and it'll have an OEM new piston. So there's a lot of good stuff in this saw. You know, I make fun of it because it's a junk saw, but really it's really not that, really it's not going to be that bad a deal at all, I don't think. Alright, let's see if we can rig up this deal right here again. Okay, we're going to have to do a little bit of innovation here. Not exactly what I was hoping for, but let's just make it work. Worry about re-engineering it afterwards. Okay, together. I don't know if that was very pretty, but it worked. How's that? No, because this doesn't go through. So basically, I really had to make this collar. There was no choice. So I thought I was just being clever. In fact, I had no choice. Anyway, so it's together, and one of the reasons why I like using the pullers is, see that? There's just no strain or pain on those cases. So let me get those case screws in. 6 of them. Okay. All right. It's actually pretty close to being centered too. All right. So next thing is I might as well get that seal in there. Fact is, the seal that came out of there was fine. You know, I probably could have left the bearing and the seal in there with no problem. I think what I want to do at this point is get the handle on. I kind of took a break from videos and gotten partway through the junk pile saw right here. I put in those limiting pins. You got 1, 2, 3. Clutch went on, and then the worm gear for the oil pump went on, pretty much in the usual way. Same with the flywheel, with the nut and the washer underneath. and a little bit of air wrench assist. That's how that went together. So I figure I'll put the top end on. Organize the table a little bit. Kind of have it mixed up here with the 038 build that I had to stop because the chain brake band was bad. So, you know, this is just going to be pretty much standard affair, and I'll just show snapshots. But what I'd like to do is just get this thing together and see if it fires up. What I'm going to do is put in, you get the arrow facing exhaust. So I'm going to put in the other side. I'm going to push the pin in that way. There's the wrist pin clip. Planning to head down to Bob's this weekend. With a rainy weekend, so we're not going to get any cut time. I'd like to get some of these saws into wood, and I've got a bunch of them to test, built over the winter time, you know. So, rings, wrist pin clips. I think now it's time to get the goo on. Glue that gasket right on there. Okay. Put a really thin film on the cylinder. That's better. Okay. Let's get those cylinder screws in there. Looks good in there. The only little issue I've got that I can see is the throttle cable is out of the trigger. Something I should have paid a little more attention to, I think. Hook up the vent, pulse line, fuel line. Ten thousandths brass. I'm going to use this ignition. Again, 10 thousandths brass. Set the clearance. Alright. Do I have a pull start? I do. I did notice there's one thing I I need to do. I should have done it way early on, and that's get that little rubber bumper in there. Alright, let's see if we can wrap this one up. I pushed that little rubber piece in there. Highly recommend doing that before I did. You know, I got this rusty old muffler takeoff from one of my 372 builds. I'm not going to clean it up, I'm just going to put it on as is. Got some gaskets around here somewhere I was going to stick in there. But, here's one. Make sure I've got the right. I do. Alright, I'm going to run out and get a 5mm. Kind of want to make a point, you know. I mean, this here is obviously not the best of materials, but I bet this thing cuts a shitload of firewood for somebody. Maybe I'll just keep it, you know. Might throw it up for $300, $350. Might just keep it, I don't know. All right. Alright, what's next? You know, really, we don't have much left here. I think the biggest thing is to put this on. And I don't know if I've got that little tiny screw that goes. These little top hats, they go hat to the inside. And then the holster cover goes over all that mess. Trucks just went by. That works. You see. There's one. These little guys right here got that big fat head on them, but they have a smaller diameter. Alright, what's left other than to put gas in it and fire it up? Top cover and handle. So let's do that. It's almost beginning to look like a chainsaw, isn't it? Getting there. Oh, I know one thing I don't have on there is a choke. Let's see if I can fish one in there. Works. Air filter. Top cover. How good would the video be if there was no suspense whatsoever? It's got to be a little bit, you know? I'm going to have to go get larger diameter threaded. I'm afraid. You can't be afraid of that. Sometimes it's just what you got to do. Bottom one's solid. Got to use a little shorter ones. They don't poke all the way through that handle. I got to get a larger diameter one for that. I'll just use one from Lowe's. That was nice and solid. Alright, I guess it's time to go see if this thing will fire up. Yeah, let's see if this starts. Now, this is not totally fair because I primed it and stuff like that. So. So there it is, trunk box saw number 1 with less than stellar parts, but you know, my bet is that thing cuts a whole bunch of firewood before it's done. Whether I keep it and use it or I move it along. There's really nothing wrong with it other than it's ugly. So I'm doing it this way to kind of prove a point. So hope you enjoy. Talk to you later. Bye for now.